Welcome, dear friends, to this very special service today on the occasion of the auspicious birth anniversary, 154th birth anniversary of Swami Vivekananda. And we had been observing this occasion in many ways, right in the early morning with special chants, then with ritual worship, then we saw a beautiful video presentation, and now there is time, to really think, ponder over the message of Swami Vivekananda. And for that we have two very good speakers, thinkers, devotees of Swami Vivekananda who will be giving presentations in this symposium. One is Teresa Guerra and another is Arunim Roy.
Absorbed one day in Samadhi, Ramakrishna had found that his mind was soaring high. As it continued to ascend, the forms of God and goddesses were left behind, and it crossed the luminous barrier separating the phenomenal universe from the absolute, entering finally the transcendental realm. There Sri Ramakrishna saw 7 venerable sages absorbed in meditation. These, he thought, must have surpassed even the gods and goddesses in wisdom and holiness. And as he was admiring their unique spirituality, he saw a portion of the undifferentiated absolute becoming congealed, as it were, to take the form of a divine child. Gently clasping the neck of one of the sages with his soft arms, the child whispered something in his ear. And at this magic touch, the sage awoke from meditation. He fixed his half-opened eyes upon the wondrous child, who said in great joy, "I am going down to the earth. Won't you come with me?" With a benign look, the sage expressed his assent and returned into deep spiritual ecstasy. Ramakrishna was amazed to observe that a tiny portion of the sage, however, descended to the earth, taking form of a light, which struck the house in Calcutta where Narendra's family lived. And when he saw Narendra for the first time, he at once recognized him as the incarnation of that sage. Let us all mentally bow down to that Rishi, to that Vivekananda. Namah Shriyati Rajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. I bow down to Vivekananda, who is the king of the sannyasins, an embodiment of existence, knowledge, bliss absolute, and removes the torment of the world. Whoever reads Swamiji's works unfailingly gets attracted by his sharp intellect, his soul-stirring speeches, and brilliant exposition of philosophies. Romarola, a Nobel laureate for literature himself, has said, "I cannot touch these sayings of his without receiving a thrill through my body like an electric shock." Yes, there is no doubt that Swamiji is an embodiment of knowledge, but he himself mentions that character is of the noblest type, in which all these three, knowledge, love, and yoga, are harmoniously fused. We find that it is very true in case of Swamiji. He is an embodiment of bliss and love as well. In Swamiji's own words, God is love personified. He is apparent in everything. He further says, God is a circle with circumference nowhere and center everywhere. Every point of that circle is living, is conscious, active, and equally working. if we study his life, we can literally see this ever expanding circle of love that encompasses all. Today, I will try to show this aspect of Swamiji by discussing about his love for his three mothers: his biological mother, Bhuvneshwari Devi, Holy Mother, Sri Sarada Devi, and his motherland, India. We will also discuss the universal nature of his love. Swami Tathagatananda ji writes in his book, Vivekananda's Devotion to His Mother, that woman as mother is regarded as the embodiment of a loving and living God. And Swamiji verily upheld this age-old Indian tradition. Bhuvneshwari Devi played a very important role during the formative years of Swamiji. She always guided him since his childhood, narrated to him the great Indian epics and stories to inculcate in him good samskaras and ideal character. She inspired him to be truthful and courageous. For this, Swamiji was forever indebted to her. In his own words, "The love which my mother gave me has made me what I am, and I owe a debt that I can never repay." Although he became a monk, he was always concerned about her welfare. His love and devotion can be seen from this incident. And mind you, this is after his triumphant return from the West. One day, Swamiji happened to visit his mother. She had just finished her midday meal. Swamiji was very disappointed, as nothing was left over for him to take as a prasad. One drumstick, shojne they call in Bengali, was all that was left on his mother's plate. He immediately grabbed it and put it in his mouth. It was Bhuvneshwari Devi's dearest wish to go on a long pilgrimage with him. So in spite of his failing health, Swamiji took her on a pilgrimage to the holy places of East Bengal and Assam, to Dhaka and Shillong. One of Swamiji's most remarkable letters in connection to his mother is addressed to his friend and disciple, Maharaja Ajit Singh, the Raja of Khetri. Swamiji writes, "I have one great sin rankling always in my breast, and that is, in order to do service to the world, I have sadly neglected my mother. Now my last desire is to make seva and serve my mother for some years at least. She lives now in a hovel. I want to build a little decent home for her. Is it too much for a royal descendant of Ramachandra to do? For one who he loves and calls his friend? I do not know whom else to appeal to. The money I got from Europe was for his work, and every penny almost has been given over to that work. Nor can I beg for others for my own self. I am tired, heartsick, and dying. Do, I pray, this last great work of kindness to me, befitting your great and generous nature, and as the crest of the numerous kindness that you have shown me." In this letter, you can see Swamiji's heart wrenching, seeing the condition of his mother, and love and concern dripping from its every word. Moving on, Swamiji's adoration for and reverence for Holy Mother, Sri Sarada Devi, is also well documented. When Swamiji's friends and devotees were persuading him to go to Chicago to address the Parliament of Religions, Swamiji sought Holy Mother's permission. She gave him permission to go and sent her blessings as well. And after the success of his mission in America, Swamiji wrote to his brother disciple, Swami Shivananda, "Without Shakti, there is no regeneration for this world. Mother has been born to revive that wonderful Shakti. Without the grace of Shakti, nothing is to be accomplished. To me, Mother's grace is 100 times more valuable than father's. Mother's grace, mother's blessings are all paramount to me. Brother, before proceeding to America, I wrote to mother to bless me. Her blessing came, and in one bound I cleared the ocean. Swami Chetanananda ji likens it like Hanuman crossing the ocean with Sita's blessing. Swamiji's very first visit to Holy Mother after his return from America vividly describes and illustrates his love and reverence for her. This is an eyewitness account of Kumud Bandhu Sen. He writes, Mother stood silently at the door of her own room, wearing her usual veil-like covering. Swamiji prostrated himself before her. It was indeed a heavenly sight to see. The world-famous Swami Vivekananda prostrating himself with deep reverence and humility before Holy Mother, like a devoted son. The Holy Mother, who was deeply moved at the sight of Swamiji after an interval of nearly 7 years, stood speechless, as if in a trance. The whole atmosphere was surcharged with indescribable sublimity and divine bliss. When he made pranams to the mother, Swamiji did not touch her feet as is often customary, and when he stood up, after prostrating to her, he turned to all of us who were standing behind and said in a soft voice, Go and prostrate before Mother, but don't touch her feet. She is so gracious, so tender and affectionate that when one touches her feet, she readily draws unto and takes upon herself all the misery and suffering of that hapless soul. Out of her infinite grace and unbounded love and compassion for one and all. Thereby, she has to suffer silently for others' sake. She is ever in a superconscious state and understands everyone's mind. One day, towards the end of his earthly chapter, Swamiji bowed down to Holy Mother and said, Mother, I know for certain that with your blessings, in future, many Nareens will be born and hundreds of Vivekanandas will evolve. And I also know for certain that in this world, there is only one mother like you and there is no other. Moving on to Swamiji's love for India, his motherland, which he considered to be sacred, the birthplace of many spiritual giants. Before he embarked on his mission to America, Swamiji traveled the length and breadth of India as a parivrajaka, a wandering monk. During his travel, he realized that the underlying all the diversities of custom and tradition was the unbroken oneness of spiritual vision. And India, though fallen and degraded, still possessed the vitality to rise once again to her pristine position of greatness. His long wandering brought him face to face with the dreadful poverty that his countrymen had to endure and made him poignantly feel the truth of Master's word. Ramakrishna had said, religion is not for empty bellies. Swamiji told Maharaja of Mysore that he intended to go to America to ask the West to the means to improve the material condition of India and to take in exchange the gospel of Vedanta for its spiritual uplift. How deeply he felt for his countrymen can be seen with this incident. On the very day of now world-famous speech at the Parliament of Religions, he was invited by a man of great wealth and distinctions to his home and lodged in a princely room fitted with luxury beyond anything he could conceive. Yet, instead of feeling happy in this splendid environment, he was miserable. He could not sleep a wink, pondering in contrast over India's plight. The luxury bed became to him a bed of thorns. He rolled down on the empty floor and in agony cried his heart out. O mother, what do I care for name and fame when my motherland remains sunk in utmost poverty? Who will raise the masses in India? Who will give them bread? Show me, O mother, how I can help them. On the eve of his departure from London in 1896, an English friend asked Swamiji, Swami, how do you like your motherland now after 4 years of luxurious, glorious, powerful West? Swamiji's reply was, India, I loved before I came. Now the very dust of India has become holy to me. It is now the holy land, the place of pilgrimage, the Tirtha. His subsequent founding of Ramakrishna Math and Mission was for liberation of mankind and welfare of the world, keeping in mind the dire needs of his countrymen. To his brother monks, he said, throw aside your meditation, throw away your salvation and such things. I love you all ever so much, but I wish you would all die working for others. He wanted them to be selfish, unselfish. He himself led by example. Even till his last day on the earth, his thoughts were for the welfare of others. He had indeed become the big banyan tree that Sri Ramakrishna had wanted him to be, providing succor to the weary mankind. Swamiji's love is universal because it is not restricted by caste, gender, religion, or race. Why? He himself answers, as self, there is only one in the universe. It is in me and you, and is only one. And that one self has been reflected in all these various bodies as various different selves. Swamiji's life is one glowing example of what he wanted us to inculcate. Love that makes for that oneness. Looking around, we see that we have an ever-growing need for the kind of love Swamiji wanted us to have. He worked tirelessly at the expense of his own health for the upliftment of this mankind. He loves us all so dearly. Least we can do is to try and lead our lives like how he would have wanted us to. Let me conclude by quoting from Swamiji's poem To a Friend, which is also beautifully sung here at the center. Listen, friend, I will speak my heart to thee. I have found in my life this truth supreme. Buffeted by waves in this whirl of life, there is one ferry that takes across the sea. Formulas of worship, control of breath, science, philosophy, systems varied, relinquishment, possession, and like. All these are but delusion of the mind. Love, love, that is the only thing, the sole treasure. These are his manifold forms before thee. Rejecting them, where seekest thou God? Who loves all beings without distinction? He indeed is worshipping best his God. Thank you.
The title of this talk is Swami Vivekananda at Mother Kali's Feet. We read in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna that he had a vision of Narendra, later on known as Swami Vivekananda, as a perfected sage. He described Narendra as belonging to a very high level, free from ignorance and delusion, perfect from his very birth. Due to his Brahmo Samaj training, Narendra was devoted to the ideal of the formless God, and therefore could not accept Sri Ramakrishna as his guru, as he believed that an intermediary was not necessary between humans and God. Narendra did not acknowledge for a long time that Sri Ramakrishna's visions were true. Initially, he would not bow down to an image and would not accept Mother Kali. After his father passing away, Narendra was going through a very difficult financial situation. He couldn't find a job. His mother and siblings depended on him. They were starving. One day, probably late 1885, Narendra asked Sri Ramakrishna to pray to the Divine Mother to remove his family's poverty. Sri Ramakrishna told him to go by himself and pray to the Mother, who with no doubt would listen to his prayer. As soon as Narendra entered the shrine of Mother Kali, he saw her as a living goddess, giver of liberation and wisdom. He could not ask for worldly things. He asked for liberation, love, knowledge, and renunciation. Narendra went back to the master, who rebuked him for not praying to Divine Mother to remove his poverty. The master sent him for a second time to the temple, and again, standing in front of Mother Kali, Narendra forgot to ask. Again, he returned to the master, and by the third time, the master sent him back, but he couldn't do it. Narendra then thought that this was the master's work, so he asked directly to Sri Ramakrishna to remove his poverty. Sri Ramakrishna guaranteed him that his family would have cover for their basic needs. Sri Ramakrishna was overjoyed with this experience that Narendra had with the Divine Mother. This was a lesson for Narendra. However, this is not the end of the story. Sometime after this incident, actually 4 or 5 months before the master's passing away, the following conversation transpired between Narendra and M. M was the recorder of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. I'm quoting from the Gospel. Narendra, has anybody seen God as I see that tree? M. Yes, our master, meaning Sri Ramakrishna, has seen God that way. Narendra, it might be his hallucination. They continued the conversation. Then Narendra said, I want truth. The other day, I had a great argument with Sri Ramakrishna himself. M, smiling, what happened? Narendra, he said to me, some people call me God. I replied, let 1,000 people call you God, but I shall certainly not call you God as long as I do not know it to be true. It seems to me that after Narendra had that experience with Mother Kali, he was still having doubts. He questioned the visions that Sri Ramakrishna had and labeled them as possibly hallucinations. He was probably having doubts of the experience that he had with Mother Kali in the shrine. Could be. Besides, at that time, he still had not accepted Sri Ramakrishna as an incarnation of God. Narendra was a spiritual lion. He had a very strong personality, very strong convictions. A conviction is a belief or opinion that is firmly, strongly held. When we hold a belief, we nurture that belief with similar beliefs, not with conflicting or contradictory ones. When we receive input that doesn't match our current beliefs, we could vehemently refuse it or we could react with denial and justify our denial, or we could accept it, making our own personal accommodations to this new input. However, if our old convictions are still very strong, even after opening the door to new ideas or experiences, we could be going back and forth, still trying to make sense of it. The process of changing our beliefs or convictions could happen after having a big blow, although they often get modified gradually. I cannot tell what was going on in Narendra's mind. However, it seems, by what we've read, that he was still struggling with ideas regarding God with form, God without form, and of Mother Kali as an expression of God. Let's see what he said. I'm quoting from The Master as I Saw Him by Sister Nivedita. "How I used to hate Kali," he said, "and all her ways. That was the ground of my 6 years fight, that I would not accept her. But I had to accept her at last. Ramakrishna Paramahansa dedicated me to her, and now I believe that she guides me in every little thing I do, and does with me what she will. Yet I fought so long. I love him," meaning Sri Ramakrishna, "you see, and that was what held me." We will come back to that point. "I saw his marvelous purity. I felt his wonderful love. His greatness had not dawned on me then. All that came afterwards, when I had given in. At that time, I thought him a brain-sick baby, always seeing visions and the rest. I hated it. And then I too had to accept her." This is so beautiful. Narendra was associated with Sri Ramakrishna for 5 years. He struggled for 6 years to accept Mother Kali. He said, "I had to give in. I had to accept her." That doesn't mean that someone placed a knife under his throat and said to him, "You have to surrender to Mother Kali or else." No, changing his beliefs or convictions probably did happen because of several factors. Among these factors, I believe, are, number one, his intellectual capacity up to a point, meaning that reasoning can bring us up to a certain point in our spiritual journey. Number two, that he was a highly spiritually evolved soul. And number three, which what I consider to be the most important factor, Swami Vivekananda took a step of faith. When he said he had to give in, he took a step of faith. It is like he unlocked the door. To accept something that we cannot see with our human eyes, we have to take a step of faith. That reminds me of a joke that Swami Yoganananda has told us before, about this person that, while falling from a cliff, got hold of a branch and desperately screamed for help as he was afraid of dropping down. He heard God's voice from the bottom telling him, "My child, let it go, I will hold you." The fellow replied, "Is anybody else up there?" So we get a glimpse sometimes and say, "Yes, God has been nice to me. God is near me. How can I doubt?" But then, again we start doubting. This is too hard. How I know this is real? This is not for me. we get a tennis match within our heads, bouncing our beliefs back and forth, on and on and on. Now, is it wrong to have doubts? Is that the root of the problem? Were Narendra's doubts wrong? Saint Thomas, also known as the doubter, was one of Jesus Christ's disciples. After Jesus was dead, a few disciples claimed that they have seen Jesus resurrected. Saint Thomas replied to his brother disciples that he will not believe it unless he sees Jesus and touches his wounds. I remember people saying, "You are like St. Thomas, if you don't see it, you don't believe it," as a way to criticize a person for being skeptical. Years ago, Swami Vivekananda ji was talking about St. Thomas, and he made a comment that struck me. He said that what St. Thomas did or said was for our sake. That's the only thing I remember about that informal talk by Swami Sarvagathananda ji. But I think he was making the point that to be doubtful, to question things that we don't understand, is not wrong. If we don't question, we don't learn, we don't evolve. We have to be thankful to the ones that came before us and were incredulous, as they have helped us to move forward. I would say that Narendra's continuous questioning of Sri Ramakrishna's ideas was for our sake, so we could learn and evolve. Why did Narendra continue visiting Sri Ramakrishna? Why didn't he stop and say, "I'm done with this. This constant arguing is getting me nowhere"? What kept him coming to Sri Ramakrishna? Narendra said that it was Sri Ramakrishna's unconditional love. Similarly, for us, when we have doubts in our spiritual journey, we have to cling onto something. We have to remember those little moments when we have felt blessed, loved, or special to God. Keeping holy company, reading the scriptures, and performing spiritual practices help us to cling onto, to be part of something very special. Vivekananda lived with Sri Ramakrishna for 5 years and still had many doubts. Our doubts will not necessarily be removed after reading a spiritual book or attending a retreat, but unlocking the door and clinging onto what we already have will help us. What else do we hear from Swami Vivekananda about the Divine Mother? How did he manifest his surrender to Mother Kali? Well, he surrendered both in word and action. In the book, The Life of Swami Vivekananda by his Eastern and Western disciples, we read, following the pilgrimage to Amarnath, the Swami's devotion became concentrated on the Mother. He once told his disciples during these days that wherever he turned, he was conscious of the presence of the Mother, as if she were a person in the room. Further down in that same chapter, we read that after Swami Vivekananda returned from Srinagar, he met with his disciples. I'm quoting, he entered their houseboat, his hands raised in benediction. Then he placed some marigolds that he had offered to the mother on the head of each of them. No more hurry on. It is all mother now. In the book Inspired Talks, talking about Divine Mother, Swami Vivekananda said, I'm quoting, "She is life, she is love. She is a person and can be seen and known as Sri Ramakrishna saw and knew her." End of quote. His love for the mother was concretely seen in his regard for women as representations of the Divine Mother. As Arunim said, he had a tremendous love, respect, and devotion for his biological mother. Actually, Swami Tathagatananda wrote about this aspect of Swami Vivekananda's life in his book titled Vivekananda's Devotion to His Mother, Bhuvaneshwari Devi. Swami's love for the Divine Mother was also personified in his devotion to Sri Sarada Devi, the Holy Mother. Swamiji referred to her as the living Durga, and he obediently considered her to have the last word. This is what he said about Holy Mother to his brother disciples in a letter that he sent to Swami Shivananda in 1894. I'm repeating some of what Arunin said, but as Swami said, repetition is okay. You have not yet understood the wonderful significance of Mother's life, none of you. But gradually you will know. Without the grace of Shakti, nothing is to be accomplished. To me, Mother's grace is 100,000 times more valuable than Father's. Mother's grace, Mother's blessings are all paramount to me. Brother, before proceeding to America, I wrote to Mother to bless me. Her blessings came, and at one bound I cleared the ocean. Brother, I shall show how to worship the living Durga, and then only shall I be worthy of my name. I conclude with the same quote that Swami Vivekananda ended with in one of his lectures in Thousand Island. That is in the book Inspired Talks. Keep the beloved, beautiful mother in the heart of your hearts with all care. Throw out everything but the tongue. Keep that to say, Mother, Mother. Let no evil counselors enter. Let you and me, my heart, alone see Mother. Thou art beyond all the lives, my moon of life, my soul of soul. Jai Ma.
तं देशिकेन्द्रं परमं पवित्रं विश्वस्य पालं मधुरं यतीन्द्रं हिताय नृणां नरमूर्तिमन्तं विवेक आनन्दमहं नमामि. I salute to Swami Vivekananda, who is the pure teacherhood manifested for the welfare of universal humanity. Dear friends, we were privileged to hear two wonderful lectures in this symposium. Incidentally, both without actually sharing notes with each other, complemented the ideas that each of them presented. It is Arunim who started by telling how Swami Vivekananda's love for mother and in general the love that he has in his heart. It is sometimes assumed that a monk who has left home and hearth and has gone somewhere in forest in search of God or some unseen universal reality has banished all love for beings. That actually is not the case. In fact, for such a person who is trying to seek God, the love has manifested much more because there is less of selfishness. When the selfishness reduces, the love is enhanced. We can easily see this. When there is more selfishness, there is less love. Less selfishness, automatically there is more love. When somebody becomes a monk, actually the taste of that kind of life is that the love takes a universal form, a sans attachment. You know, it is based on this fact, as Arunim pointed out, that there is just one soul, one self. And thus, when one sees it, then one loves everybody as one loves oneself. Do you see this point? That is where even Jesus, as he mentions, love thy neighbor as thyself. How can you love somebody as thyself? By seeing that the self is actually same. That is an important thing that sits in many heads as an intellectual idea, but for a saintly person that is the experience. And therefore that love becomes automatic, spontaneous, without any formalities, so to say. Formalities are good, necessary for inculcating the love maybe, but when it becomes spontaneous, then all formalities just disappear. And this happens with a person who sees the same self in all. That is the source of love for Swami Vivekananda. And therefore, that love really is enveloping every individual, everything. Doesn't depend on which country that person lives in, to what race that person belongs to, or any individual personal connection that he or she may have. It transcends all that. And wherever it needs to manifest in a particular form, it takes that form. It is like, you see, a very simple example you can verify here. The electricity takes the form as the appliance. In this instrument sound system, it is manifesting as the amplification of sound. In these lights, it is experienced as lights. In many other appliances like a refrigerator, it will manifest as the cooling power. In a heater, it manifests as a heating power. So depending on the appliance, the same electricity manifests. So the love does not manifest in the same way, same love, but its manifestations differ according to what is the appliance, what is the thing in which it is getting manifested. So it changes. Love is same, but its manifestations become different. And this is seen in Swami Vivekananda. When we read his literature, especially his letters, because letters are very personal. And somehow these days, in our morning readings on Swami Vivekananda, his letters are being read. So you can see a personal touch comes in letters. And therefore, his letter written to his brother disciples, they are of one type. Letters written to his disciples, one type. Letter written to friends, acquaintances of different nature, different types, different temperaments, they are different. According to each person's temperament, each person's connection, that love manifests. And for him, that love is the central thing in the practice of religion. It is not intellection. It is not kind of, the pranayama and breath control and so many other practices. It is mainly love. And it is a central teaching of Swami Vivekananda. Our Teresa, we sometimes call her Mother Teresa. And she retorts, my name is Teresa and I am mother, but that doesn't make me Mother Teresa. Anyway, so she gave a very beautiful presentation on how Swami Vivekananda comes to the Divine Mother, Mother Kali. One thing I would like to add in this context, very important thing, that Sri Ramakrishna became overjoyed when that happened. One has to ponder over that what made Sri Ramakrishna so happy when Narendra accepts Mother Kali. What happened? He certainly questioned Sri Ramakrishna, as Teresa rightly told. He said, well, these may be hallucinations. Yes, and he went on questioning. He went on doubting. But Narendra's doubting and somebody else's doubting need not be of the same nature. And Narendra's doubting was to discover the truth. And doubting nature could be a big enemy in our life. Doubting nature means whatever, even if you get the evidence, the habit is keep on doubting. It is so the person never gets to truth. Doubting to get to truth is very good. But doubting just for the sake of doubting isn't really going to help us. In fact, it is a big obstacle. Narendra doubted. And his doubt really represented the doubt of the modern man. And thus his conviction also represents the path and conviction for the modern man. Yes, how that conviction will come to my life, how my doubts will go. And why Sri Ramakrishna was so happy when Narendra accepted Divine Mother. See, Divine Mother or Mother Kali represents philosophically this very beautiful idea that the same, one without second, formless, transcendent and immanently present everywhere, that Brahman, although infinite, although beyond all forms, has the power to manifest through each and every form. that power is represented by the divine motherhood. And unless one accepts this power, the understanding is only half, that the Brahman is beyond all names and forms. That is not the full truth. That which is beyond all names and forms also manifests through all names and forms. That makes it full truth. And therefore, as long as Narendranath was accepting only that formless aspect, the knowledge was half. Sri Ramakrishna saw in Narendranath, and rightly so, the instrument through which his message was going to be broadcast all over the universe. And unless the instrument is perfected, the message wouldn't be delivered fully and properly. And therefore, when he saw that the instrument is now perfected, and that was the reason for his tremendous joy. Yes, Narendranath now is really the messenger, the teacher of mankind, and that is why almost at the fag end of his physical life, Sri Ramakrishna wrote it, he wrote for the convenience of the modern man, because modern man, verbal telling something we don't believe. We have to have a written document. And Sri Ramakrishna, the incarnation for the modern age, therefore makes this available. Yes, there is a documentary evidence on that paper. Sri Ramakrishna wrote actually that Narendra will teach mankind. He is now the fit instrument to bring this teachership. So that is how the acceptance of Mother Kali was such an important milestone in the progress of his Sri Ramakrishna's foremost disciple. And with this, equipped with this, now Narendranath burst on the world, bringing in the message of divinity in each of us. And that is the age-old message of Vedanta brought to modern man, not as a piece of intellectual information, but as a matter for practical application and actual experience. As he mentions in one of his wonderful, short but very important discourse that was given at Belur Math. And the title of that talk, actually it is only a short report of what he spoke, and that report is published in those Indian addresses, Colombo to Almora, and that has the title Sannyasa, its ideal and practice. I am not going into the other details of that great lecture. Only one point I want to highlight here. He exhorts all the audience there that remember, gone are all those old rishis, and with them are gone their opinions as well. Now each of you have to become a rishi. That is the ideal he keeps before us. Just parroting their words is not going to bring salvation to us. Each of us has to become a rishi. Let us remember, he says, each of us who are here, each of us in this world, each of us who gets to hear these words, let us remember, each of us has to become a rishi. Vishwanath, what? You have to become a rishi. Peter, you have to become a rishi. Paul, you have to become a rishi. We all have to become rishi. What? Vrishali, you have to become what? Speak out. She doesn't want, it seems. We have to become rishi. That is the idea, Each of us has to become rishi. And that is what is going to make our life successful. The divinity, that is our true nature, is going to manifest then. It has to manifest. That is the great message that Swami Vivekananda has come to deliver, and he has delivered it in such a powerful way. In a very short letter written to Sister Nivedita, he makes it clear that he says that the purpose of my life can be told in a very few words, and that is to make everyone aware of the divinity hidden in us and the way to manifest it in every walk of life. And that is what Swamiji's message. Let us keep this message in our minds and let us try to work it out and make our life blessed thereby. Thank you, friends.